To be able to take abuse, you got to be able to have people talk crazy about you. In this business, you got to be able to have people disrespecting you.
Often seen as the embodiment of the American dream, Will Smith came from the rough streets of Philly to infiltrate the radio, TV, and cinemas, and he did it all while being seen as a nice guy in a corrupt world. In doing so, he became a big brother or father figure to millions of Americans, but over time, that illusion has been completely shattered. As we all know by now, it began when he started to make the transition from rapper to actor. Once a dedicated MC who was committed to propelling himself and DJ Jazzy Jeff into megastars, Will never had any intentions of segueing into acting. In fact, what many people don't know is that the only reason he was receptive to it in the first place is because his music was on the decline.
We released our next album and it was like a flop. It went like double plastic.
I had spent most of my money, like all of it. I spent all my money.
I didn't forget, but I didn't pay the IRS. The IRS took all that stuff, so I was like broke.
Soon, a chance meeting with TV producer Benny Medina set in motion the chain of events that lead to the first pilot of Fresh Prince. But not before Quincy Jones intervened to alter Medina's concept.
Benny walks me in and introduced me to Quincy. And like, hey Q, what's up, man? He's like, hey man, I saw your music videos. I love what you're doing. Tell me your rap name again. They call me the Fresh Prince. All right, good. That's what we're gonna call the show.
Left struggling to pay the IRS and intimidated by the high-profile execs he was interacting with, Will took the job on a whim.
And I was like, hey Q, hold up, man. Hold life forever.
A show that Will admitted he couldn't bear to watch because his inexperience meant that he was essentially a puppet reciting lines. Will, later recalling how Quincy said it was going to affect the rest of his life, would be a massive understatement, particularly as the show created a situation where the TV character Will and the real-life Will almost became impossible to distinguish. But out of respect for Quincy, Will never questioned anything. Having told Rap Radar that he decided to follow those who know and shut up and listen, it makes sense that a naive Will thought nothing of further obscuring the lines between himself and his on-screen antics across the show and its promotional material.
Welcome to the Fresh Prince Bel-Air Tour 90.
I have a TV show coming out, The Fresh Prince.
Fresh meaning squeaky clean, fresh and wholesome.
Like fresh.
Oh, fresh like that.
I think I'm gonna like Bel-Air.
Wide-eyed and impressionable, Will was now reaping all the rewards of the opportunity he seized. And as the show carried on until 1997, Will had made himself an integral part of households of millions around the world, averaging nearly 20 million viewers every week. And given his youthfulness at the time, he had no idea of the power and impact that he had, and as a consequence, how much pressure would be on his shoulders to carry on that legacy in his personal life.
When you're doing something like that, I can't tell. I can never tell whether or not something is gonna work. I gotta get away from it a little bit and then come back. I had no idea that Fresh Prince would have that kind of impact. When I look back on it, I can see, it was like, oh, duh, the intercultural racism between the rich blacks and poor blacks, and then being uprooted and put into the full mainstream white world. I can see where those ideas would make for a rich show, but at that time I couldn't see it at all.
From Bad Boys to Men in Black, Will became a bona fide superstar, becoming the only actor to ever have 8 consecutive movies gross more than $100 million in the US box office. And in the case of Independence Day, where the studio originally had doubts over casting him because of his race, Will shattered all expectations. At the same time, his music career was on the up, with both albums, Big Willie Style and Millennium, going multi-platinum. And what underpinned it all? That infectious personality that he'd first exhibited to the world as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But what the public didn't know is that even though he appeared to be living out the perfect life, Will was plagued by deep insecurities. But before we get on to that, I need to tell you about today's sponsor. You see, even when trying to make this video, I kept getting messages from streaming platforms like Netflix that it wasn't available to watch in my location. So I was stuck. But by using NordVPN, I could change my virtual location to the UK, Australia, or even Japan to finally catch up on Fresh Prince. And that's not all. You see, NordVPN keeps your online identity safe by encrypting all of the information sent between your device and the internet, keeping your personal data protected from big companies and cybercriminals, while also swapping the real location of your device with a new one. Basically, you can virtually travel to any country across the globe, because masking your IP address is essential to becoming private online. A VPN makes sure your city, country, and download history aren't linked to your identity. And with NordVPN's threat protection feature, they even allow you to block ads, trackers, malware, and phishing attempts. For me personally, I like to work from cafes, but the problem is I have to use shared public Wi-Fi. which can be dangerous as it's a gold mine for hackers. But with NordVPN, I can encrypt all of my online data and secure my personal information even when using the free public Wi-Fi. So what are you waiting for? It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. So make sure you check out NordVPN today, and if you enter my promo code HipHopMadness, you'll get an extra 4 months free. That's nordvpn.com/HipHopMadness. Even though he appeared to be living out the perfect life, Will was plagued by deep insecurities. For starters, you had the fact that even though he'd stand up on the Grammy stage and make himself the symbol for family-friendly rap by bragging about how he didn't need a cuss to sell records, Will secretly hated the fact that he was seen as a soft rapper, an issue which was talked about on tracks such as Mr. Nice Guy. Will had an anger which was lurking just below the surface, and most crucially, out of the public eye. Speaking to Rap Radar, he decided that if he couldn't weaponize his rage or take aim at those calling him soft, he would use his optimistic public persona as its own form of attack.
It was always difficult for people to say I was soft. My music was cotton candy and all of that. So I always wanted to fight to prove myself. But fighting yourself to maintain positivity is the hardest fight you ever gonna have. That struggle to just stay my course, be the person in the world that I wanted to be no matter what people said. I started to call it offensive positivity.
Despite this, Will still felt his manhood challenged to the extent that he felt uncomfortable in his own skin, and most notably, his relationship with Jada Pinkett Smith, particularly when it came to her friendship with a rapper who was the antithesis of Will's public image in many ways. In an in-depth interview with The Breakfast Club, Will discussed how his own feelings of inadequacy were magnified by Tupac's presence.
That was a big regret for me too, because I could never open up to interact with Pac. She just loved him. He was the image of perfection. I couldn't handle it, you know. I was the soft rapper from Philly, and he was Pac.
Right.
Now, I was deeply insecure. Well, I wasn't man enough to handle that relationship.
Successful, good-looking, and talented with a beautiful wife, and as self-assured as they come, the Will that emanated from our TV screens was someone that anyone would want to be. As a result, he was idolized by the culture. Back in the day, J. Cole pined for that Jada and Will love. Similarly, Joyner Lucas dedicated an entire song to Will, a track which paid homage to him as a hero for generations of inner-city kids with big dreams. But for all the positive impact that he's had, it later became clear that the unsubstantiated lines between the character of Will and Will himself had been to the detriment of his sanity. And across his autobiography and interviews, he's spoken at length of his inability to keep the facade up any longer.
I painted myself into a corner with Will Smith, and I realized that we have our childhood traumas and we have our experiences, and then we all create these characters that are going to be our characters that defend us in the world. Then that character wins some things for us. We succeed by behaving this way. Yes. Then what happens, you get to a point where it stops working as well. And the reason that it stops working is because it's not true. And on my 50th birthday, when I jumped out of that helicopter over the Grand Canyon, that was kind of my moment for myself where I was like, I'm gonna be who I am, even if it isn't in line with the Will Smith that people think I'm supposed to be.
In this clip, Will basically predicted the downfall of his status as a role model. As once the real Smith emerged, it became clear that he was not the picture-perfect, stable guy we thought he was. A major part of this comes from the dismantling of his family life, particularly his marriage to Jada. In that same Breakfast Club interview, Will seemed to allude to everything that later come out about their dynamic, from the cheating to the bizarre power dynamics which have seen Jada even admit that she never wanted to marry Will in the first place.
Me and Jada talk about that a lot, even in the idea of our marriage and how people want us to be married versus how we're really married. It's a really different thing, and it's so hard to let go of the characters
what people
want to see, and because also those characters saved your life when you were young.
After the Oscar slap incident, which we don't need to delve into since it's been covered to death, the perception of their marriage has now wilted to the point that some see Will as a man who's in a psychological relationship. Here, we have one of the key building blocks of Will, the role model, crumbling away. Forced to don a familiar disguise to the point he typecasted himself in real life, it's become painfully obvious that the Will that we grew up with and the real man are two distinctly different beings, and nothing has made that more clear than his autobiography. A book that is essentially a 160-page deconstruction of the image of Will Smith. Even the story of his initial meeting with Quincy Jones has a far less positive undertone to it in this book than in the YouTube-friendly retelling that he told. Everyone was there, from Steven Spielberg to Tevin Campbell. Stevie Wonder and Lionel Richie were arriving as I pulled leveled up. That was too much for me. I knew I didn't belong here. And right before my fragile self-image convinced me to bounce, I saw Benny Medina, a familiar face, a life preserver as I was drowning in yet another sea of insignificance and irrelevance. "Hey man," Benny called out. "You made it." I wanted to say, "Yeah man, you, I'm out." But instead I said, "Yo, man, don't take that jacket off. Trust me, you won't see it again." Rather than being the infectiously uplifting and positive role model with a down-to-earth persona, the book portrays Will as a man who was tormented by past issues which manifested in his Hollywood career. For example, look no further than how he responded to the box office bomb of his 2014 movie, After Earth. "That was the most painful failure of my career," he said. "Wild Wild West was less painful than After Earth because my son, Jaden, was involved in After Earth, and I led him into it. That was excruciating. I got reinvigorated after the failure of After Earth. I stopped working for a year and a half. I had to dive into why it was so important for me to have #1 movies, and I never would have looked at myself in that way. When I was 15, my girlfriend cheated on me," he continued, "and I decided that if I was #1, no woman would ever cheat on me. All I have to do is make sure that no one's ever better than me, and I'll have the love that my heart yearns for." Having revealed that he'd previously thought about committing and had considered offing his father to avenge his mother, through to feeling wonderful about being objectified, Will exposed the side of himself that portrayed a fragility that was completely out of line with what we came to expect. And even in the aftermath of the infamous slap, Will has continued to enlist his past as a way to justify his actions in the present.
You know, it was a lot of things. It was the little boy that watched his father beat up his mother. That was a rage that had been bottled for a really long time.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I lost it. My nephew, Dom, is 9. He had stayed up late to see his Uncle Will. And he's just like, "Why did you hit that man, Uncle Will?"
As much as he tries to rebuild what he'd left in ruins, there's a concern that perhaps the ship has sailed in terms of garnering public sympathy. For those who'd spent years glued to the Fresh Prince's every move, his downfall feels oddly personalized, particularly when a man who had seemed untarnished by Hollywood and its ensnaring ways turns out to be just as wrapped up in it as the rest of them.